everybody, James with PC Gamer here, and we're at PAX West in Seattle, and I'm talking with Brian and Josh from Obsidian. And you guys are talking about your RPG design overall and player choice at a panel. Can you kind of give me just your take on what you think is important in player choice and what is too much, too little, and how that's maybe reflected in Tyranny and Pillars of Eternity and other games you guys are making?
Definitely. I think for choices for players, we really want to make sure that the choices they can make are meaningful. I think a lot of times with RPGs, you get a lot of different dialogue options that all just fold back into the exact same thing, and it's fake choice. So generally, we want to make sure that the choices we're giving players, they actually can see the impacts of those choices later on in the game. And with Tyranny, what we're trying to do is actually have a smaller game. It's about 25 hours of gameplay that has a lot of choice and reactivity. So there are actually multiple different ways you can play through the game based on your choices and get very different stories from the game.
I think overall, at Obsidian, we really believe that player choice is the cornerstone of the type of role-playing games that we make. A lot of that comes out of our tabletop experience. A lot of us come from backgrounds playing D&D and lots of other role-playing games. And so a lot of times we ask ourselves, what do we think players would want to do in this circumstance? And we try to support that as much as possible. And that means in a lot of cases doing short-term reactivity, long-term reactivity, giving them both what they expect and also something unexpected that's entertaining. So we put a lot of thought into how we design those choice and consequences over time.
Well, cool. Yeah, and I think we've seen that choice, especially like we one of our writers did a piece. I don't know if you read it, on playing as an entire party of bears in Pillars of Eternity. Shout out to Chris. Yeah. So nice job. You're really pulling it off. Specifically, I kind of want to ask in Tyranny, you have framed this as something a little different for an RPG like this.
Right.
It's you're sort of the bad guy. Can you kind of run that down? Like, give me a higher picture of what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so basically the premise behind Tyranny is that evil has won, and you are part of the conquering army. The Overlord has conquered the known world, and you are one of the leaders of the army that conquered everything. And now you're in the aftermath of this conquest, and you have to try to figure out, like, this subjugated land, how do you bring it into the Overlord's empire? And you're kind of like the Judge Dredd character, like you're judge, jury, and executioner. So everyone you meet, you get to decide, do they live, do they die, are they punished, are they rewarded? And it's all based on your choices and your decisions for how the world shapes itself after this conquest.
That's interesting to me because in traditional RPGs like this, a lot of them sort of pull from D&D and the hero's journey and good versus evil. And this one, as evil, you're sort of it seems to me you're avoiding the, do I make a good choice or do I make an evil choice?
Right.
That dichotomy, and you're sort of putting the player in a position to empathize sort of with what it's to be this kind of character. Can you talk about how that is reflected in player choice in Tyranny, and maybe how what you've learned from Pillars going into this?
So with Tyranny, by playing the evil character, a lot of times in games, if the evil choice is like you just attack everyone and you're the homicidal maniac. And we really wanted this to have a lot more nuance. So a lot of the choices you're making, on the surface of it, you're being told by your allies that, oh, this is like the good and moral choice, but that means you're slaughtering a village full of people in order to get your way. And even if you try and make something what we consider more the good choice, the more noble choice, you're surrounded by evil people, and their motivations and desires are always going to affect what you're trying to do. So it's very hard to be the actual stereotypical noble character, the paladin type guy. So we really try to make sure that all the choices have context and meaning within the world, so that it really feels like as you're making these decisions, and even though there's a lot of really evil options that are there for kind of that excitement factor of can I really do this? And we actually allow you to make that choice and you get rewarded for it. Like a lot of games, if you make the evil choice, you end up getting punished for doing it. We want to make sure you're rewarded for those same choices. And then for those players who want to play more of a good character, they're going to have a harder road because they're surrounded by evil. So that's kind of how we're trying to approach it with Tyranny and giving the variety of evil choices.
And when it comes to Pillars, how is that sort of design ethos carried over into Tyranny? What are you guys kind of reflecting on these games that you've put out? How are you carrying this design ethos forward?
I think when we made Pillars, we were making a D&D-like game, but one of the things we decided we weren't going to have right away was alignment, because we wanted to have something that felt a little more nuanced in how we approached it. Something that I like to look back on, even though it's purely virtue-oriented, are the Ultima games. And at the beginning of the games, often you're forced to make these choices where you're choosing between two virtues. And it's not that one of them is good or one of them is bad, it's just which do you value more? Do you value honesty more or humility? Do you value this or that? And so what we found when we were building choices for the player is that things that were much more aligned with certain types of characters and ideas for characters, they tended to have a lot more depth and interest to them and pose a lot more moral conundrums than if they were just purely good or evil. We're kind of like, well, I've decided I want to be this type of character, and so I'm just going to play it throughout. When the decisions you have to make have more complexity to them, and you're being forced to choose between multiple good or multiple bad things, then I think players engage with it a little bit more, and they feel like their choices are more important throughout the game.
And the resurgence of this genre it has been interesting because it pulls from games that came out nearly 20 years ago at this point, and sometimes even longer, and it pulls from D&D, design and stuff like that. Looking at technology today and the availability of gaming PCs, and a lot of people have consoles that are capable of running these things, and it's easy. Like you can play Baldur's Gate on an iPad now. Bizarre, but cool. What has modern technology sort of allowed you to do that you couldn't before? Or if that doesn't matter, how has the design, in the last couple decades evolved for you in significant ways in designing these games?
I think one of the things with this type of game that I grew up playing, like the Baldur's Gate games, and they're some of my favorite RPGs of all time, that the depth of choice and reactivity and the deep dialogues and characters, a lot of that is present in a lot of modern RPGs, but it's kind of de-emphasized versus the large open exploratory worlds and other features that are more modern things you're looking for. And I think one of the things that with Pillars and Tyranny we're kind of bringing back is these deeper character interactions with the companions, with really large interactive dialogues, lots of NPCs with their own motivations and choices, and really being able to feel like you're inhabiting a character in this world, and the choices you're making actually dramatically shaping and affecting the world. And that's the kind of things we're trying to do with these games.
I think as far as technology in a purely development sense, I worked on some of the original Infinity Engine games, Icewind Dale and Icewind Dale 2, and the tools are a lot easier to work with now. Especially our dialogue tools are a lot easier to work with. BioWare had some pretty innovative tools back in the day, but we can track our dialogues a lot better. We can have much more reactivity in our dialogues. It's something that we could have done back in the day, but it would have been much harder to actually implement and track. So we feel in some ways kind of challenged to have more reactivity to the players' build choices, to the choices they make in quests and things like that. And as far as the pure gameplay goes, there are some neat things that are happening with rendering. We have 2D environments with 3D lighting in them and 3D characters. And with each iteration of this technology, we're able to unify that scene a little bit more. I think we had kind of the Scooby-Doo effect originally, where you had the 3D characters kind of standing out on the 2D backgrounds. But people really, I think, like 2D games when they're high res and have these beautiful hand-painted features in them. And so the more we can sort of bring those to life and integrate the characters into them, I think the more people will be immersed in the world.
Well, I think I can speak for our audience when I say we're really excited to see a return to this genre. It's such a strong return, and excited to see where it goes. And you guys have been doing it for a long time, and I think Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny are shaping up nicely, and we're looking forward to more from you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Stay tuned to PC Gamer for more from PAX West.